Welcome to this revision session, which is about extreme weather in the UK and whether and how this has effects or impacts on human activity. So I'm just going to underline in the UK. So frequently when people see extreme weather in an exam question, it does prompt them to start talking about tropical storms, because obviously those are very extreme weather events. Do double check, make sure, because it's very likely that you will be asked about the UK. If you see these words, it's likely that they're looking for a UK case study. So extreme weather obviously has impacts on human or effects on human activity. The big question is why. Now, if you remember, this. Just to explain, this picture here is the UK. You are here in Weymouth, just in the south. There's Northern Ireland there. This is a sort of roughly Europe. So this is all land. We've got France, Belgium, so on, up here, Norway. So the UK is in quite a unique situation, and it does lead to some to an amazing variety of natural hazards. So if we have a look here, if you remember when we looked at this, and don't feel overwhelmed by this at all, this relates back to the idea of our concentrated sun at the equator and our less concentrated sun at the higher latitudes near the poles, and the different pressure bands. Now, in that session, we talked about the fact that the UK is here, and from the north, we have winds pushing down, as the air is pushing down, coming towards us. Now, those winds that come from the north, I can represent them with an arrow here, are polar. They're coming from polar areas. So we have very cold winds coming from the north, okay, and that relates to this arrow here. At the same time, pushing down on top of the the hot deserts, the band of which ends up having hot deserts because of this. We have this high pressure band here where air is falling. It rose over the equator and then falls here. And then that air rushes north towards us. So let's represent that with a hot colour. So from the south, we have this tropical air, which is warm air. Okay, and if you remember the time when we had the sky turned red a few years ago, and everybody panicked and was very anxious about that actually, but that was because we had this warm air coming from the south, and it was carrying with it dust from the Sahara Desert actually, and also ash and things from some wildfires in Portugal. But anyway, that was when the air was coming this way. So obviously, if this one wins, happy days, it's warm. If this one wins, it's cold. Now that explains why sometimes it's warm and sometimes it's cold. Where these two air masses meet, they're forced up, and that will create rain, which again explains why we have so much rain. And it's not escaping my attention that I am speaking to you on a very, very rainy day. It's actually the tail end of Storm Dennis 2020. Okay, so we have another two important areas to think about. We also have wind that comes to us across the Atlantic Ocean. And as it comes across the Atlantic Ocean, it picks up a huge amount of water vapour. So this wind coming in off the Atlantic carries with it huge amounts of moisture, of water. So this is going to bring in and supply lots of rain, and it's why this side of the country, the west side, gets more rain than the east, because as it comes across it tends to drop the rain on the west. From the east we get continental air, which tends to be dry, because although it does go across a little bit of the North Sea, it has come across a large continent and dropped any moisture it had a long time ago. So air from this way tends to be dry. Now, this is also impacted by the jet stream, which I won't talk about just at the moment, but there is a video which will be attached at the bottom in the comments, which I strongly advise you to look at. It describes this beautifully. Now, obviously, if these two are winning, it's warm, it's dry, and it's perfect beach weather. If these two are winning, it's quite different, and at any point these four different influences are acting on the UK. Okay, so if we have a think, we're going to look at our case study. So our case study was The Beast from the East, 2018. Okay, and The Beast from the East in 2018 had a really big impact on the UK, and you will remember it because it was a time when the school shut. Now, why? Let's have a look at the whys and wherefores. So the why, in this case, again, I'm going to draw a picture of the UK here. Storm Emma was approaching across the Atlantic, carrying with it huge amounts of moisture. Coming from the east was the Beast from the East. And this was very, very cold polar air coming down from Siberia, really low temperatures. Now, if we think about it, we're talking about prediction and monitoring. The weather, the experts at the Meteorological Office, the Met Office, were watching this, and they identified this very cold air approaching, and they identified Storm Emma coming up with lots and lots of rain, and they realised that there was going to be a major problem, and they actually issued a red weather warning on large parts of the UK, but certainly affecting the southwest, as we know, which is why the school was shut down, because they knew that something was going to happen here, and they were absolutely right. There was extremely heavy snow. Now, that is part of the storm, but what were some of the impacts of this, some of the primary effects? There were roads blocked, which caused chaos, very, very low temperatures. Tragically, 10 died due to the extreme weather conditions. In some places, there were 7-metre snowdrifts happening. There were people stranded. I think famously hundreds were stranded for sort of over 24 hours, up towards 36 hours on the M80 in Scotland, and also on roads in Devon down here. So this was a very, very tricky situation. There were also very high winds as well. So there were 75 mile an hour winds that came. Let's put 70 mile an hour winds. So it was a really, really problematic situation. So Storm Emma and the Beast from the East. And again, that clearly relates back to this. The cold air had been deflected by the action of some other atmospheric conditions. So the cold air is coming in this way, and the storm came in this way. And as they met, there was a big, big impact. So heavy snow obviously affected it. So these were some of the primary effects that we're seeing here. Secondary effects were obviously, I should just say as well, there were power cuts. The rail network was blocked, or couldn't run. And then our secondary effects. Okay, so obviously the people being stranded is a bit of a primary and a secondary. And there were people not able to get around, schools closed, and you could link that to an impact on your education. I think for 3 hours, flights didn't run, and therefore again transport was very badly affected. Okay, so I'm going to leave that with you. You were aware of this. There were lots of effects. You will have some from your own experience, and that's absolutely fine to use your own. Okay, responses. Now this is where it gets a bit interesting. So immediate responses, the first hours and days. Think about what happened. So certainly the armed forces were deployed to rescue drivers. So if you have people in exposed locations in cars, you think, oh, that's fine, I'll leave the heater on. Well, the heater requires the engine to be running, and the engine will run out of petrol at some point if you've been stranded for many, many hours. And that puts people in a very dangerous situation if they're not equipped appropriately. They also were working to get NH staff to hospitals. They would do things like, if they would cancel routine operations, so if somebody was going in for a cataract operation or for a hip replacement, that operation would have been cancelled, not least because it would be difficult for those people to get in, but also because they need the beds to treat people who would be, obviously there would be unfortunately more accidents. So that's a very important immediate response. A good one to mention was neighbours checking on elderly residents. So, people are often asked, if you know that there's an elderly person in your road, please go and check. The Red Cross issued blankets, etc. At Glasgow Airport. That's a nice little named case study. So there were people stranded, not able to get around, and people chipped in to help. Again, those are fairly instinctive. If you can try and include some named examples, obviously in your answer, that will take it up to the next level. And again, that idea immediately. An interesting one is the long-term responses. So we live in a country that happily is well organised and well equipped, and there will be plans in place to deal with many of these things. However, long-term responses, certainly in this area, so councils review stores of salt and grit. So again, an immediate response obviously is to grit the roads. You could put that in there. And salt it leads to the ice melting more quickly. But councils may look at this and say, well, and did, if we are going to have more of these extreme weather events, we need to make sure we've got more salt and grit, which means that the roads can continue to operate and people can go about their business. It may be that they order more snowplows and gritting lorries, which are designed, or these trailers that are designed to distribute the grit and the salt. So have a think about this. How can councils, how can the government review the situation and maybe prepare to be in a better position next time? Right, okay, so if you have a look at your revision guide on this one, you will note that we've covered this, and we've covered this. When you're looking at the impacts, try and think about which of these are social, which of these are economic, and which are environmental. And I'm very aware that for many of you, you can link all of these together. They cost money, they affect people, and they impact on the environment. But do have a look. That might be a good thing to do with your revision. Okay.